This week in Unboxing Buddy, let's look through my cookbook collection. A few viewers have asked that I kind of walk through my vintage cookbook collection, so that's what we're doing today. I'm really excited to share a huge variety of vintage cookbooks that I own. A lot of them are Betty Crocker, but I have some other favorites too. It's gonna be really fun, so let's get started. We'll start, of course, with the two recipe card libraries I own. These are both Betty Crocker recipe card libraries. The yellow one, of course, is the one that we're cooking through every episode on the channel. It's got over 650 recipes, so I don't know, maybe one day we'll finish them all, but this was the first thing I bought that kind of jump-started my passionate interest in Betty Crocker and her role on the impact of food in America. So I found this card library, fell in love with it, wanted to make a YouTube channel out of it, and once I started researching, I realized that there are so many Betty Crocker cookbooks out in the world, and so that's where my collection started, and it's grown from there. So this first recipe card library is from 1971. It is a kind of a compendium of a lot of recipes in the other cookbooks. But then in 1976, an updated version of the recipe card library came out, and I also have a copy of that. This one features step-by-step pictures on them. The sections are all different. The recipes themselves are all completely different from the yellow box. I haven't cooked any of these recipes yet, but let me know if you're interested and I can start cooking through these as well. Essentially, these were subscription boxes. You would buy the box, and I think it would come with 1 or 2 sections when you first bought the box, and then every month they would send you a new section or 2, and slowly over the course of a year you would fill out the box with all of the sections. I love both of these boxes. They're so fascinating to me. They truly are kind of a culmination of all Betty Crocker recipes rolled into one, but then it's fun to see how the recipes also live elsewhere in the collection of cookbooks, so let's take a look at those too. Okay, so the next big segment of my collection is the Big Red Cookbook. I actually did a whole history segment about the Big Red Cookbook in another episode, so I'll put a link to that somewhere if you want to learn more specifically about Betty Crocker's Big Red Cookbook, but here she is. The Big Red. This is Betty Crocker's picture cookbook. It is kind of the thing that catapulted Betty Crocker into every home in America. It was one of the most popular books ever printed at the time. This book came out in 1950 and took a lot of work from a huge team of home economists to put together. It's one of the first cookbooks that feature pictures of step-by-step how to make recipes. It also contained these things called key recipes, which meant that if you could learn how to make, for example, this peach pie, here's how you can then adapt it to make other types of fruit pie. And so it really was a way to teach women how to cook and to give them all kinds of tips and tricks and step-by-step instructions. It really kind of changed the game for how we write recipes today. So yes, this is the first edition I have here, and many editions have come out since. Even more meaningful to me than this first edition is the second edition, revised and enlarged, and this one's really meaningful to me because it was my great-grandmother's, and it is well loved. It is worn and torn. But I just think it's really special to have a copy of it that generations of women in my family have used. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and now me have all referred to this cookbook to learn how to cook some of our favorite recipes in our family. This is a 3-ring binder version. You'll see each edition of the Big Red Cookbook come in both regular binding and ring binding, is because these were also given out in home economics classes. So usually the 3-ring bound ones are from a home ec or student edition of the cookbook. The next edition I own is from the 70s, which is probably around the time where the recipe card library came out. And it just has a bit of a different look and feel. This is where you can kind of start to see the recipes themselves change a bit. So what Betty Crocker considered the compendium of American cooking in the 50s then starts to shift in the 70s, shift in the 80s, shift in the 90s. And so it's funny to see which types of recipes are featured in each edition of the cookbook. Then I found a couple other editions of Big Red, either at Goodwill or on a stoop somewhere in Brooklyn. I think this one is from the 90s. Again, it's the 3-ring binder version, but it's really changed a lot. You're starting to see more things of the time, even just mini muffins and chicken wings, and you can tell that the tastes are changing. There's more like international cuisine in here that have become more Americanized. It's funny to see how these things change over time. I also have an edition from the 2000s. Every time I come across one, I pick it up because I want to own all of the Big Reds. And then finally, I also have a copy of the newest edition of the Big Red Cookbook. This came out in 2022 for kind of the 100th anniversary of Betty Crocker. I was very lucky and grateful to have gotten this book as a gift from Betty Crocker's team. So I'm really excited that I have this modern edition as part of my collection as well. What I love about this version, it continues to be like a compendium of every possible recipe imaginable. But what I think is really cool about it is that it has these heirloom versus new twists. So you could see kind of like the more traditional style of a recipe and then a twist on that. I think that's really cool that they are able to add that for the 100th anniversary. I just think it's a really well-designed book and is packed with a ton of important information. So yeah, I'm really excited to have the latest edition as part of my collection too. Next up, we have these little baby books, as I call them. They are these cute little like ring-bound hardcover books from Betty Crocker. These all came out in the 50s and 60s. And I just keep finding more and more of them, and every time I find a new one, I add it to my collection. So I have the cooking calendar, which is kind of like ideas for recipes for every month of the year. And it also includes these awesome little like daily calendar sections where I think you could like write out what you wanted to cook that day if you wanted to like use it as a real calendar. It also has like a lot of little fun facts and quotes and things so you can learn about the history of America throughout the course of the year. I also have Betty Crocker's Party Cookbook. A lot of her cookbooks kind of are organized in different ways depending on what kind of help you need in the kitchen. So one is organized month by month. This one is organized holiday by holiday, so you could have different ideas for recipes. And not only recipes, but also like gift ideas and party activities and crafts and things. There's a lot of fun stuff in here. This book I found in my grandma's basement. It's called Betty Crocker's Good and Easy Cookbook. It's just kind of jam-packed with good and easy recipes. A lot of like classic mid-century recipes in here. They're kind of organized by breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And desserts, of course. Then I have Betty Crocker's Dinner for Two cookbook. I love this one because it features the most beautiful illustrations by Charlie Harper. I went to school in Cincinnati, and Charlie Harper's from Cincinnati, and so we all kind of love him. He has like amazing murals throughout the city and stuff like that. And I just find the way that he approached drawing illustrations for a cookbook to be really beautiful and interesting. And then my last little cookbook is the Bisquick Cookbook. So it's all Bisquick related recipes, which of course was a product sold by General Mills. But the title says, Recipes from Betty Crocker in Answer to Your Requests. And then they have these little like letters from different cooks throughout America with like questions about using Bisquick. Kind of shows that kind of idea that Betty Crocker was helping women by answering their letters. She took some of the letters and also made a cookbook out of it. Another iconic cookbook of Betty Crocker's is of course the Cookie Book. This copy that I have is also from my great-grandmother. This is the cookie book that I used growing up making cookies with my mom every Christmas, and so it's well loved. It's got a lot of stains in it. Chances are if you have a Betty Crocker cookbook in your home, you probably have the cookie book. I just think it is such an iconic part of Betty Crocker's history. This first edition came out in 1963. It's actually still in publication today. I also have a copy of like what you could buy on shelves today. It's kind of a replication of the original book, so it has the same cover and the same kind of page layout, same illustrations, same photos. I like having kind of a more pristine copy as well, one that isn't also kind of like a family heirloom so that I could reference this easily too. Then we're kind of moving into my kind of big miscellaneous Betty Crocker section. So these are just a bunch of other cookbooks I've picked up along the way. Some of these came from my great aunt's basement, and so that includes these 3 cookbooks. These I think are from the 80s, Betty Crocker's Microwave Cooking, Cookbook for Boys and Girls, and Soups and Stews. These are all through the Golden Press. Then I have kind of a selection of these larger ring-bound cookbooks. This is the Dinner in a Dish. I recently came out with an episode called Dinner in a Dish, and I showed off this cookbook a little bit, but it is a complete collection of casserole recipes. And a viewer of mine actually commented that her mom got the Dinner in a Dish cookbook and it came with a casserole dish and a fondue set. So I'm curious if that was always the case, and where's my matching casserole dish? I don't know. And a friend of mine sent me this Hostess cookbook. I love this one. It is all kind of recipes for being a hostess, being an entertainer. I did a whole episode called Snack Time. I'll put a link to it up here if you want to check it out, where I flipped through this cookbook in detail and I tried out a few recipes from the cookbook itself. Let me know if you enjoy that format. I would love to do a more deeper dive into an individual cookbook and cook a couple recipes from it if you like that format. So give that video a watch to learn more about what's inside the Hostess cookbook. I found this one at a bookstore in Cincinnati. It's called Betty Crocker's All-Time Favorites, and I think it's just a collection of her all-time favorites, things that are considered kind of the bread and butter of Betty Crocker. I think this one came out in the 70s, yeah, 1972. The next two were kind of found in a Goodwill, I believe. Betty Crocker's Kitchen Secrets. This is another one from the 80s. You could tell they different eras of cookbooks have the same kind of stylistic cover. So yeah, Kitchen Secrets, tips, techniques, and guidelines for successful cooking. And it is kind of a lot of step-by-step instructions, more about techniques and cooking methods. And then of course, Betty Crocker had to get involved in the diet culture of the 90s by putting out the Betty Crocker New Choices cookbook. This book comes with a lot of nutritional charts and things, icon system for telling you if something's heart healthy or low in gluten or low fat. And then finally I wanted to share, this is the Betty Crocker microwave cookbook. Some of them are crazy. Some of them you're cooking a full roast beef in the microwave or baking a loaf of bread in the microwave. I'm kind of nervous to let the microwave run for 40 minutes to cook a full roast beef, but this came out in I think the late 80s or early 90s. When microwaves really started to become in vogue and be in every person's household, so. All right, so the last few cookbooks I have from the Betty Crocker portion of my collection is these little pamphlets. So it was very common for Betty Crocker to put out lots of different types of pamphlets that would be kind of either for sale or to take for free at grocery store checkouts. They usually were really surrounding the idea of buying a Betty Crocker product and teaching you how to cook with that product. They're all Bisquick themed, of course. So we have Betty Crocker's Bisquick Cookbook, which is really cute. We also have the Bisquick Party Book, which are more specifically recipes for entertaining. And then finally, this is one of my favorite cookbooks in my collection. This is Betty Crocker's 101 Delicious Bisquick Creations. And it is one of Betty Crocker's first cookbooks that came out in 1933, which I just think it's crazy that I'm holding a book that was printed in 1933. It was 90 years ago. So yeah, I think it's really beautiful. It has these incredible paintings of Bisquick recipes that are truly little artistic compositions. It's so beautiful. I love this one of the strawberry shortcake. Oh, it's so good. So yeah, it's just really great to have one of the first cookbooks with Betty Crocker's name on it. This came out only 10 years after she was invented. So yeah, I think it's a really special addition to my collection. All right, so now we're moving on to the non-Betty Crocker cookbook part of my collection. I just have a few more things I want to share that are very emblematic of the 20th century and the type of cooking we did. They aren't necessarily from Betty Crocker, but they still are very in line with the type of foods that we make on this channel and are important to kind of the story of 20th century cooking. So the first one is the Joys of Jello cookbook. This is the first edition. It has just all of these really fun, incredible Jello recipes. A lot of tips and tricks for how to make Jello. I've been referring to this chilling time diagram since I started this channel. Like the first video I ever made on this channel, I referred to this diagram that was like uploaded online somewhere, and it's cool to like have a copy of it in the cookbook too. I love making Jello recipes. There aren't too many of them in the yellow recipe card library box. So if you'd like to see me try more Jello recipes, I would love to kind of dig into the Joys of Jello more. So please comment down below if you're interested in more Jello content. This book came out in the 60s, but when I got my copy off of Etsy, I think, the seller also sent me the new Joys of Jello, which came out in the 70s. And it's funny to see kind of the difference. There's all these photos of people in this cookbook, little scenes set at the family table. It really is like it's giving Americana. Mother and son making Jello together. Very 70s vibes. So I would love to also cook from this one as well. I think there are some duplicate recipes, but some new ones as well. Another important book in my collection is the Fanny Farmer Cookbook. This version is from the 1990s. I got it from my great aunt. It's truly a brick. It's large. But Fanny Farmer originally wrote this cookbook in like, I think 1896. Fanny Farmer took over the Boston cooking school from Mary Lincoln, and also took Mary Lincoln's cookbook and revised it and like kind of enlarged it. And what Fanny Farmer was really important for was bringing more scientific thinking to cooking. She was really a proponent of understanding chemistry and understanding nutrition so that women were cooking kind of nutritious meals to feed their family. So understanding, you know, carbohydrates and proteins and calories. She also was a big proponent of standardized measurements. So before this cookbook, a lot of written recipes just said like a heaping spoonful of flour, and what does that mean? So she was really at the forefront of standardizing the way that we measure ingredients so that the recipe comes out the same every single time you make it. And so really important that I have a Fanny Farmer cookbook in my collection. I hope to collect other editions one day. Another fascinating book from my collection is this Pillsbury Bake Off cookbook. It's called the Best of the Bake Off collection. It's got 1,000 recipes in it from 10 years with Pillsbury Bake Offs. This also came from my great aunt's house. If you haven't heard of the Pillsbury Bake Off, it's incredible. Basically, starting in 1949, Pillsbury was inviting women from all over the country to come together and over a 24-hour period bake in this like room full of kitchens. Every contestant had its own mini kitchen in like a huge warehouse full of kitchens. You would come from all over the country and bake your own custom recipe that you developed using Pillsbury flour. And then it was judged by all of these kind of esteemed chefs and celebrities, and the grand prize winner would often go home with a lot of money and sometimes, GE appliances for their kitchen. And so it was just a really great way to celebrate recipe making and baking and like American cooking. Really cool to see, especially some of the photography of the kitchens in the big room. But yeah, it's just crazy to see like how wild some of these recipes are, how inventive they are. It's just a great collection of kind of the ingenuity of the American cook. The final cookbook I'm going to share with you from my collection today is Poppy Cannon's Can Opener Cookbook. This is a first edition, and it's really a prized possession of mine. I've been kind of searching for a first edition for a while. Poppy Cannon was a food writer for a lot of women's magazines throughout the mid-century, and this book came out in 1951. She was a proponent of convenience cooking before anyone else, and so to write a cookbook specifically about using canned ingredients as a shortcut was kind of unheard of at the time. She really was making waves in the food industry because people just didn't like the idea of convenience cooking. And she showed women that it was okay to take shortcuts. You didn't need to spend all day in the kitchen. She was kind of a very prolific food writer at the time, and was really influential to a lot of other chefs and food writers. And I just think that her story is really special, and she was really brave and was really at the forefront of something new. And a lot of the reason why we cook the way we do today is because of Poppy Cannon. I would love to cook some recipes from this cookbook, so please let me know if you're interested in, learning more about Poppy and learning more about these recipes. I'd love to dig into it into more detail. But yeah, one of my favorite cookbooks that I own. I'm so happy to have a copy of it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of my cookbook collection. It was so fun to walk through all of these with you. Please comment below if you have any cookbooks that you'd like to see in more detail. I would love to kind of do a deeper dive into a few of these and kind of test out a few recipes. So yeah, let me know what you have more interest in, and until next time, happy homemaking.